Cheers, Aaron. Just want to say thanks to you as well for publishing this and taking the chance with it and giving it the platform. Yeah, so Knife Edge, I'll just give a tiny bit of background in terms of what it's about. So 12 years ago, I was stabbed in a random attack when I lived in Rochdale, which is just outside Manchester. The person who did the attack had just come out of prison and wanted to go back, so they just decided to stab me in the back and then hand themselves into the police, which is obviously what you would do in such a situation. And yeah, like Aaron said, I was, I technically died in the ambulance for a little while, and it was touch and go for a few weeks in hospital, and luckily I came out the other side. So these poems are pretty much the genesis is of that moment, and it's taken me probably a decade to write them, because it was very, very raw and too close at the beginning. And as the time's passed, it's become much more easy to process. So I'm going to read 6 poems. The pamphlet itself is a chronology. It runs from kind of like the beginning to the end in terms of the incident and the recovery. And yeah, so the first poem I'm going to read is called Education at Her Majesty's Leisure. The kind of story behind this was I did an MA at Manchester Met about 2 or 3 years after the stabbing, and part of that I was able to read with Carol Ann Duffy at the Royal Exchange Theatre, and she read Education for Leisure, which is a poem about stabbing, and it was quite a controversial one on the GCSE syllabus, and it got removed. And she made a joke about stabbing, and then I got up next and then said, my poems are all about being stabbed. And yeah, she was like a little bit mortified, but it was quite funny. So this is Education at Her Majesty's Leisure. You touch my arm, but before I turn, you stab me in the back. A sneak attack, like when Macbeth wet up Duncan in his bed. You think that you are death and I am dead, but I give chase. Imagine the look on the face of Tybalt when Romeo flipped and lost his shit before he stuck that blade between his ribs. That was it. But in this production, I am Mercutio, dealt a mortal blow as I stagger into the co-op and collapse on the floor. Old Hamlet's ghost, almost. Later that night, I wake in a darkened room, a tomb, alone. Hermione's slow return from stone, and you, Claudius, in your cell, babbling your confession, that bullshit apology, how you'd learnt your lesson. So the next poem is the one Aaron was alluding to in terms of the cover. It's called Gravelet Traverses Niagara. Let's be honest, none of the 5,000 strong crowd gathered on the cliff edge were there to watch him make it to the other side. What they secretly wanted was for him to topple from the wire and fall hundreds of feet through the air, spinning and twisting like an eddy to the bottom of the gorge, his body breaking on the rocks as though it were made of waves. But he felt none of that as he concentrated on putting one foot in front of the other, felt the wind buffet his body as though he were a pendulum on borrowed time, his life in the balance of a pole in his hands that tilted rhythmically, a set of scales weighing up his fate as he walked the finest of lines that had never before nor would ever again be so clearly defined. So I was on my way to college. I was in my 3rd year at uni, and I was about to finish, and I was writing this really, really crap play about Owen Glendower and the Welsh Rebellion, and it was terrible. And I'd taken a day off uni to kind of work on this, and I had a kind of a shadowing at the local college for some PGCE experience because I was applying for a PGCE. So I was on my way there, and the last thing that I ate was a pot noodle. So this is a poem about a pot noodle. It's called Noodle Brain, by the way. I finished it 20 minutes before it happened. Bombay bad boy. Not the last meal that I had imagined, but who knows when the end is the end. What I remember about the drive in the ambulance wasn't the pain or procedures, but the thought that you would get home and find the pot on the countertop, left out of laziness as usual, and silently curse me for not doing what you ask. And I couldn't deal with that curse then, not at that moment when I needed you most. Maybe the reason why I haven't had one since is because it looks like a dried out brain, and the sudden shock of the hot water stirs it all to life again. The sachet of sauce ripped open like a wound. Yeah, I've still not had a Bombay bad boy, so that's one of the negatives of being stabbed, is you can't have pot noodles. So after, I was in hospital for a few weeks, and it took me months to recover. I lost a lot of weight, and I had to reset my year at uni, which was a blessing in disguise, because I then turned to poetry again. And my kind of dissertation supervisor was Jean Sprackland, which was an awesome experience, getting to work with her so closely, and Michael Simmons Roberts. And afterwards, though, I don't know if anybody here has ever had a kind of a near-death experience, but I felt invincible. I had this kind of aura about me that nothing could happen, almost like I was bulletproof. And I don't know, it was such a strange feeling that I had this kind of otherworldly purpose to being on the earth. And this is where Death Wish comes from. Fuck it became the motto, because I knew I couldn't die. I had a recurring impulse as I crossed the motorway bridge to scramble down the bank and walk across all 6 lanes of rush hour traffic, because I knew nothing would happen. One night I closed my eyes and counted to 15 as I balanced on my tiptoes on top of the car park roof. I went down dark alleyways searching for the truth, but nothing dared jump from the shadows. And when a fight kicked off outside the pub, I stood amongst the melee without a scratch. But being indestructible eventually messed with my head, because I had no idea why I was still here. And I wished death would just show up so I could ascertain the facts of why the fuck he decided to send me back. I finally realised as I watched the news that June, as Derek Bird rampaged through Cumbria, all those people in the wrong place at the wrong time, that there was no design, that there might be all that might be all that life is, just a succession of near misses, deflections of catastrophe that can turn any way in an instant, a stray decision that means the difference between walking away unscathed or being wrecked by the collision. So this is my penultimate poem. It was published in Poetry Birmingham, so I'll give a shout out to them because they're an awesome journal. And this is, I've still got a very small scar on my back from that, which is quite a nice memento to have, I guess. It's a good party topic anyway. So, scar. I stood on the hill looking down into the valley at the heaps of slag dumped on the edge of the quarry, the mounds piled high like the barrows of Neolithic kings robbed of their mineral robes. The old pump house was a ruin of stone, the roof long lost and the tops of the walls covered in a thick baize of moss, a hollowed out snooker table. I skied down the scree slope, the ground moving quickly underneath my feet, a dry hushing. I peered through the gate that blocked the adit, the passageway filled with water and the echo of my voice as I called out to the dark. Walking back to the tops, through new growths of beech and ash, foxglove, speedwell and the mottled rash of cranesbill climbing up the bank, I revelled in the regeneration. But one turn of the wind and a switch in the waves of the grass revealed an enormous scar running horizontally along the ridge, barren except for the shadows of the scrambling grass. I reached around to my back, knowing it is something we share, these rifts in our landscapes, that can never be hidden, that will always be there, no matter how many layers we wear. And then finally, the last poem is called Aberdeen. I went up to Aberdeen for an interview for my PGC a couple of weeks after coming out of hospital, and I just wasn't with it, and it wasn't a very successful thing, but it was the first time I'd been out of the house, and it was kind of quite a good restorative process. There's little bits, shades of Derek Mann in here towards the end. So Aberdeen. Thinking back, it was a mad idea to go up to that top corner shelf of land in such precarious health just 4 weeks after the stabbing. My skin a translucent parchment, my body a bag of broken ornaments. We didn't appreciate how far it was that morning we jumped in the car, but we had to escape the claustrophobia of home, the interview the perfect excuse. Neither of us said, but we both knew I hadn't a chance of getting in. Frail, shuffling shade of my former self, more junkie than teacher. Our premonition turning out to be true. I was morose on the way back home, angry. anchored in misery, black clouds. When you pulled into Tyre Bagger to enter the car of my weather, I told you to just go, to leave me there, that you would be better off on your own, before the freezing February air, lethal on my lung, had me coughing up sorries on the edge of the wood, where snowdrops had blanked out every inch of the ground. A clean slate, spring's latest shot at life, and you stood next to me, taking my hand, telling me that everything would be all right. Thanks very much for listening. Cheers, Aaron, for everything. Hope you enjoyed the poetry.